The morning air was crisp at Kensington Palace as Detective Sergeant Marcus Thompson adjusted his earpiece and checked his watch. It was 6:30 a.m. on a Tuesday in September, and the routine security briefing was about to begin. Marcus had been part of the Metropolitan Police's Royalty and Specialist Protection Unit for 8 years, but protecting the Cambridge children still felt like the most important job in the world. The briefing room was filled with familiar faces, seasoned officers who had dedicated their careers to royal protection. Chief Inspector Williams stood at the front, his weathered face serious as always. The day's schedule was typical. Prince George would attend his morning classes at Lambrook School, followed by a private art lesson at the palace, and then an outdoor play session in the secured gardens. Marcus listened carefully to every detail, but his mind wandered to his own son, Tommy, who was just a year younger than Prince George. The parallel wasn't lost on him. Both boys were 8 years old, both loved football, and both had that innocent curiosity that made childhood so precious. The difference was that Marcus's son could walk to the corner shop without armed guards, while Prince George lived in a world where every movement was calculated and every stranger was a potential threat. After the briefing, Marcus made his way to his position outside Prince George's private study. The young prince was already seated at his wooden desk, pencil in hand, working on mathematics problems. Through the reinforced glass, Marcus could see the boy's tongue poking out slightly in concentration, a habit that reminded him so much of his own son when faced with challenging homework. Prince William appeared in the corridor, walking with the quiet confidence that came from years of public life. He nodded to Marcus with genuine warmth. Despite his royal status, William had always treated the protection officers with respect and kindness. He understood that these men and women put their lives on the line every day for his family. "Good morning, Marcus," William said, stopping briefly. "How's Tommy doing with his football?" Marcus was always surprised that the prince remembered these personal details. "He's doing well, sir. Made the school team last week. That's wonderful. George is quite keen on football, too. Perhaps they could have a kickabout sometime when this madness calms down a bit." The madness William referred to was the recent increase in security threats. Intelligence reports had been coming in for weeks about potential plots targeting the royal children. Nothing concrete, but enough chatter to put everyone on high alert. The threats weren't new. They came with the territory, but lately they seemed more frequent and more detailed. As William entered his son's study, Marcus resumed his position. The palace was a maze of corridors, each one monitored by cameras and patrolled by officers. Yet despite all the technology and manpower, Marcus knew that human vigilance remained the most important element of protection. Technology could fail, systems could be hacked, but a dedicated officer with sharp instincts was irreplaceable. The morning passed without incident. Prince George completed his studies, had lunch with his tutor, and then joined his father for their planned art lesson. Marcus watched as father and son sat side by side painting watercolor landscapes. George's painting was enthusiastic if not entirely accurate. His trees were purple and his sky was green. William's attempts weren't much better, and both of them were laughing at their artistic efforts. These moments reminded Marcus why his job mattered. Beyond the protocol and procedures, beyond the titles and ceremony, he was protecting a family, a father who wanted to spend time with his son, a little boy who deserved to grow up feeling safe and loved. Around 3 o'clock, Marcus received a message through his earpiece. Chief Inspector Williams's voice was calm but urgent. "All units, we have received specific intelligence regarding a potential threat this afternoon. Maintain current positions and report anything unusual immediately." Marcus's training kicked in. His posture straightened. His eyes became more focused, scanning every shadow and movement around him. He discreetly touched the radio on his chest and the weapon concealed beneath his jacket, ensuring everything was in place. The art lesson continued peacefully, but Marcus's awareness had shifted into high gear. The intelligence reports had been vague but troubling. Someone with knowledge of the palace routine had been asking questions about Prince George's schedule. The inquiries had been subtle, spread across different sources, but when pieced together, they painted a concerning picture. Security services were still investigating, but the consensus was clear. Something was being planned. As the afternoon progressed, Marcus noticed small things that might have seemed insignificant to others. A delivery van that had passed by the main gate twice, a maintenance worker he didn't recognize, A photographer with a telephoto lens positioned across the street, claiming to be documenting the palace architecture. Individually, these observations meant nothing. Together, they created a pattern that made Marcus uneasy. Prince George and his father moved from the art room to the library, where George was supposed to spend an hour reading before his outdoor playtime. The library was one of Marcus's favorite assignments, a quiet room filled with centuries of books, many of which had been read by generations of royal children. The afternoon sun streamed through tall windows, creating golden patches on the antique carpet. George selected a book about knights and dragons, settling into a comfortable armchair that dwarfed his small frame. William sat nearby, occasionally helping with difficult words, but mostly just enjoying the peaceful moment with his son. Marcus positioned himself where he could see both the main entrance and the garden doors, his eyes constantly moving, cataloging every sound and movement. At 4:15 p.m., Marcus's earpiece crackled to life again. "Marcus, this is Control. We need you to be aware that we've lost visual contact with an individual who was flagged earlier today. Caucasian male, approximately 35 years old, wearing dark clothing. He was last seen in the vicinity of the palace grounds. Maintain visual contact with the principal at all times." Marcus acknowledged the message quietly, his pulse quickening slightly. A lost contact meant someone potentially dangerous was unaccounted for near the palace. The security net was tight, but determined individuals sometimes found ways through. His job was to be the final line of defense. Prince George looked up from his book, perhaps sensing the subtle change in atmosphere. "Marcus, do you like dragon stories?" Marcus smiled, managing to keep his voice calm and friendly despite the tension. "I do, Your Royal Highness. I used to read them to my son when he was your age." "What's your son's name?" "Tommy. Does he like knights too?" "He does. He says he wants to be a knight when he grows up, just like the ones in the stories." George grinned. "I want to be a knight too. Papa says knights protect people who can't protect themselves." "That's exactly right," Marcus replied, the irony not lost on him. Here he was, a modern-day knight, protecting this young prince who dreamed of becoming a knight himself. Prince William looked up from his own book, smiling at the interaction. He understood the delicate balance his protection officers maintained, being professional guardians while also being human beings who cared about his children's emotional well-being. George had formed relationships with several of his regular guards, and William encouraged it. He wanted his son to see these officers not just as intimidating figures in suits, but as good people who happened to have an important job. As 5 o'clock approached, it was time for Prince George's outdoor playtime. The palace gardens were extensive and beautiful, but they also presented security challenges, multiple entry and exit points, plenty of places to hide, and the complexity of maintaining a secure perimeter while allowing a child to play freely. Marcus accompanied Prince George and his father to the garden, coordinating with other officers to ensure the area was secure. The garden had been swept earlier, and additional officers were positioned at strategic points throughout the grounds. Everything appeared normal, but Marcus's instincts were telling him to stay alert. Prince George ran ahead to his favorite climbing tree, a massive oak that had probably been standing for over a century. William followed at a more sedate pace, occasionally calling out encouragement or gentle reminders about being careful. Marcus positioned himself where he could see the entire area, while staying close enough to react instantly to any threat. The radio chatter in his earpiece continued. Officers were following up on various leads, checking identifications, and expanding the search for the missing individual. The palace was a complex environment, with dozens of staff members, visitors, and service personnel coming and going throughout the day. Finding one specific person among all that activity was like searching for a needle in a haystack. As Prince George swung from the tree branches, Marcus noticed a movement in his peripheral vision. A man in dark clothing was walking along a service path that should have been restricted. He was too far away to identify clearly, but his movement pattern was wrong, too purposeful, too direct. Most people wandering through the gardens moved casually, stopping to admire flowers or architecture. This man was moving with a specific destination in mind. Marcus spoke quietly into his radio. "Control, I have a possible contact in Sector 7. Male individual in dark clothing, moving purposefully along the eastern service path." "Copy that, Marcus. Units are responding to your location." But even as backup was on the way, Marcus realized that the man was closer to Prince George than any of the other officers. If this individual had malicious intent, Marcus would be the only thing standing between him and the young prince. The man continued walking, and Marcus could see that he was carrying something in his right hand. From this distance, it was impossible to tell what it was, but Marcus's training had taught him to assume the worst. He moved slightly closer to Prince George, while trying not to alarm the child or his father. Prince William, with the keen awareness that came from years of living with security concerns, noticed Marcus's subtle change in posture. Without being obvious about it, William moved closer to his son, ready to follow Marcus's lead if necessary. The unknown man was now about 50 yards away and still approaching. Marcus could see his face more clearly. He appeared to be in his 30s, with dark hair and an intense expression. More importantly, Marcus could now see that the object in his hand was black and rectangular. It could be a phone, a camera, or something more dangerous. Marcus made a decision that would define not only this moment but his entire career and his relationship with the royal family. Instead of waiting for backup or trying to manage the situation from a distance, he stepped directly between the approaching stranger and Prince George. "Sir, this is a restricted area," Marcus called out, his voice firm but not aggressive. "I need to ask you to stop where you are." The man paused, looking surprised to be confronted so directly. For a moment, Marcus wondered if he had made a mistake. Perhaps this was just a palace employee taking a shortcut, or a confused visitor who had gotten lost. But his instincts were screaming that something was wrong. "I'm just taking pictures," the man replied, holding up what Marcus could now see was indeed a camera with a large telephoto lens. "The architecture is beautiful." Marcus didn't relax. Photography near the royal children was strictly regulated, and anyone authorized to take pictures would have appropriate identification and escort. "I'll need to see your credentials and authorization for photography in this area." Prince George had stopped playing and was watching the interaction with curious eyes. William moved to stand next to his son, his hand resting protectively on George's shoulder. Both father and son trusted Marcus's judgment implicitly. "I don't have any credentials," the man admitted, his earlier confidence fading. "I just wanted to get some pictures of the palace." Marcus stepped closer, his hand moving instinctively toward his concealed weapon. "Sir, I need you to slowly place the camera on the ground and step back." The man hesitated, and in that moment of hesitation, Marcus saw something in his eyes that confirmed his worst fears. This wasn't a confused tourist or an overeager photographer. This was someone who had come to the palace with a specific purpose, and that purpose involved Prince George. Other officers were now approaching from different directions, but Marcus was still the closest to both the potential threat and the royal family. Everything he had trained for over the past 8 years came down to this moment. His duty was clear, even if it meant putting himself in danger. The man suddenly raised his camera, but instead of pointing it at the palace architecture, he aimed it directly at Prince George. Marcus realized that this might not just be about taking unauthorized photographs. Intelligence agencies were always concerned about surveillance that could be used to plan future attacks. Without hesitation, Marcus moved directly into the line of sight between the camera and Prince George. "Sir, place the camera on the ground immediately. This is your final warning." The tension in the garden was palpable. Prince William was ready to grab his son and run if necessary, but he also knew that Marcus was trained for exactly this type of situation. The best thing he could do was trust his protection officer's judgment and be ready to follow his instructions. Marcus could hear other officers approaching through his earpiece, but they were still 30 seconds away. 30 seconds that could make the difference between a minor security incident and a major breach that could compromise Prince George's safety for years to come. The man with the camera looked around, perhaps only now realizing how many armed officers were converging on his position. His earlier confidence had completely evaporated, replaced by what looked like panic. This was often the most dangerous moment in any security incident, when a potential threat realized they were trapped and had to make a split-second decision about how to respond. Marcus kept his voice steady and authoritative. "You're surrounded by armed officers. The best thing you can do right now is cooperate fully. Place the camera on the ground. Put your hands where we can see them, and step back slowly." For a moment that felt like an eternity, the man stood frozen. Marcus could see him calculating his options, perhaps wondering if he could complete whatever he had come to do before the other officers reached him. It was in this moment that Marcus made the decision that would change everything. Instead of waiting to see what the man would do, instead of trying to manage the situation from a safe distance, Marcus stepped forward and placed himself directly in harm's way. If this man was dangerous, if he was carrying more than just a camera, if his intentions were violent, then Marcus would be the first target. But Prince George would be safe. The decision was made not from the security manual or from years of training, although both had prepared him for this moment. The decision came from the same instinct that made him check on his own son every night before going to bed, the same protective impulse that every parent understood. In that instant, Prince George wasn't just a royal assignment. He was a child who needed protection, and Marcus was the only person close enough to provide it. The man finally began to lower his camera, but Marcus could see that his other hand was reaching into his jacket pocket. This was the moment when everything would be decided, when Marcus's choice to prioritize duty over his own safety would either be vindicated or would cost him everything. Marcus saw the man's hand moving toward his jacket pocket and knew he had perhaps 2 seconds to react. His training took over completely. 8 years of preparation condensing into one critical moment. Without thinking about his own safety, Marcus lunged forward and grabbed the man's wrist before he could retrieve whatever was in his pocket. "Get down on the ground now!" Marcus shouted, using his full authority as an armed police officer. The man struggled briefly, but Marcus had the advantage of training, position, and determination. Within seconds, the suspect was face down on the garden path with Marcus's knee on his back. Other officers arrived immediately, forming a protective circle around Prince William and Prince George, while additional backup secured the suspect. Marcus remained on top of the man until his colleagues could apply proper restraints, his heart pounding from the adrenaline, but his mind focused on ensuring the threat was completely neutralized. Chief Inspector Williams was the first senior officer on the scene, his face grim as he surveyed the situation. "Good work, Marcus. What do we have here?" Marcus looked up, still breathing heavily from the confrontation. Unknown male, approximately 35 years old, carrying professional photography equipment without authorization. He was attempting to photograph Prince George and reached for something in his jacket when challenged. Williams nodded and turned to one of the other officers. "Search him thoroughly and check what's in that pocket. Get the camera to forensics immediately. I want to know what's on it and where it came from." Prince George had moved closer to his father, but he wasn't crying or showing signs of panic. The 8-year-old had grown up with security procedures as a normal part of life, though this was the first time he had witnessed such a dramatic incident. Prince William kept his arm around his son's shoulders, speaking to him in quiet, reassuring tones. "Is Marcus okay, Papa?" George asked, watching as his protection officer coordinated with the other security personnel. "Marcus is fine, George. He was just doing his job, keeping you safe." As the suspect was searched, officers discovered that his jacket pocket contained not a weapon, but a small recording device. This revelation sent a chill through the security team. Someone had been planning to record not just images, but audio of Prince George's private conversations and activities. This level of surveillance suggested a much more sophisticated operation than a simple photography incident. Williams walked over to Marcus, who was now filling out his incident report. "Marcus, I need you to walk me through exactly what you observed and what made you decide to take direct action." Marcus reviewed the sequence of events carefully. "Sir, the subject's movement pattern was inconsistent with authorized personnel or casual visitors. He was moving with purpose toward Prince George's location. When challenged, he initially cooperated but showed deceptive behavior when asked for credentials. The decision point came when he reached for his jacket pocket while maintaining visual contact with the principal." "And your assessment of the threat level?" Marcus paused, considering his words carefully. "Sir, my assessment was that allowing the subject to complete whatever action he was planning posed an unacceptable risk to Prince George's safety and security. The potential consequences of inaction outweighed the risks of direct intervention." Williams nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the kind of judgment we need from our protection officers. You made the right call, Marcus." As the immediate crisis passed, the full implications of the incident began to sink in. This wasn't just a random photographer or an overzealous royal watcher. The sophisticated equipment, the knowledge of palace routines, and the recording device suggested someone with professional training and specific objectives. Intelligence services would need to investigate whether this was an isolated incident or part of a larger operation. Prince William approached Marcus as the garden was being cleared. "Marcus, I wanted to thank you personally. Your quick thinking and decisive action prevented what could have been a much more serious situation." Marcus felt a mix of pride and relief. "Just doing my job, sir." "No," William replied firmly. "What you did today went beyond duty. Step up, Pros. You put yourself at risk to protect my son, and Catherine and I will never forget that." The mention of Catherine, the Princess of Wales, reminded Marcus of the broader implications. The royal children's security wasn't just about protecting them from immediate physical threats. It was about preserving their ability to have something approaching a normal childhood despite their unique circumstances. Every security breach, every incident, every moment of fear chipped away at that precious normalcy. As the investigation continued over the following hours, more details emerged about the suspect. His name was David Crane, a 34-year-old freelance journalist with a history of aggressive tactics in pursuing celebrity stories. But this case went far beyond typical paparazzi behavior. The equipment he carried was worth thousands of pounds and included sophisticated listening devices capable of picking up conversations from considerable distances. Even more concerning was what investigators found on his camera and recording equipment. Dozens of photographs taken from outside the palace grounds over several weeks showing Prince George's daily routines. Images of the young prince walking to his lessons, playing in the garden, even eating lunch with his tutors. The recordings contained fragments of private conversations, including personal details about George's education, his friendships, and his family relationships. The investigation revealed that Crane had been conducting surveillance on Prince George for nearly a month, building a detailed profile of the boy's daily life. This information could have been used to plan more serious intrusions or could have been sold to individuals or organizations with malicious intent toward the royal family. Marcus spent hours being debriefed by security officials, intelligence personnel, and senior police officers. Everyone wanted to understand exactly how Crane had gotten so close to Prince George and how he had gathered so much detailed information. The answers were troubling. Crane had been patient, methodical, and professional in his approach. The suspect had used a variety of techniques to avoid detection. He had varied his observation times and locations, used different vehicles, and even employed disguises on several occasions. He had studied the security routines carefully, identifying patterns and gaps that he could exploit. Most disturbingly, he had demonstrated knowledge of palace procedures that suggested he might have had inside information. As the day progressed, Marcus found himself at the center of a complex security review. His actions during the incident were being analyzed not just to ensure he had followed proper procedures, but to understand how the protection protocols might need to be updated. Every detail mattered: his positioning, his decision-making process, his timing, and his communication with other officers. The review process was thorough but supportive. Marcus's superiors recognized that he had faced an unprecedented situation and had responded with exactly the kind of initiative and courage they expected from their officers. But they also needed to understand whether there were lessons to be learned that could improve security for all the royal children. One of the most significant aspects of the investigation was the discovery that Crane had not been working alone. Phone records and financial documents revealed payments from an unnamed third party, someone who had commissioned this surveillance operation. This revelation elevated the incident from a simple security breach to a potential conspiracy involving unknown actors with unclear motives. Prince William and Princess Catherine were briefed on all these developments, and their reaction was a mixture of gratitude toward Marcus and concern about the broader implications. They had always known that their children would face unique security challenges, but the sophistication and persistence of this particular threat was sobering. That evening, Marcus finally had a chance to call his wife and tell her about the day's events. Sarah Thompson had been married to a protection officer for 10 years and understood the demands and dangers of the job, but hearing about such a direct confrontation still made her worry. "Are you okay?" she asked immediately. "Really okay?" Marcus looked around his small office at the palace, surrounded by incident reports and security briefings. "I'm fine, Sarah. Tired but fine. It was just one of those days when the training really mattered." The news is saying there was a security incident at the palace, but they're not giving any details. There won't be many details released publicly. The important thing is that everyone is safe. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Marcus, I need you to know how proud I am of you. And Tommy will be too when he's old enough to understand. After ending the call, Marcus reflected on the events of the day. He had joined the Royalty and Specialist Protection Unit because he believed in public service and because he wanted to be part of something important. But until today, the reality of that service had been largely theoretical. Today, for the first time, he had faced a situation where his actions directly determined whether a child would be safe or not. The psychological impact of such an experience was significant. Marcus found himself replaying the incident repeatedly, analyzing every decision point, and wondering if he could have done anything differently. This was normal and expected. All protection officers received training in dealing with the aftermath of critical incidents. Over the next few days, Marcus received support from department psychologists, his fellow officers, and his supervisors. Everyone recognized that what he had experienced was not routine police work, but rather an extreme situation that tested every aspect of his training and character. The investigation into David Crane continued to reveal disturbing details. Forensic analysis of his equipment showed that he had been planning to sell his surveillance material to multiple buyers, including foreign media outlets and private intelligence firms. Some of the prospective buyers had connections to organizations hostile to the British government and the royal family. This revelation transformed the case from a privacy violation into a matter of national security. Intelligence services from multiple agencies became involved, working to identify all the individuals and organizations connected to Crane's operation. The scope of the investigation expanded far beyond the palace grounds to include international connections and potential state-sponsored activities. Marcus found himself consulted not just about the immediate incident, but about broader security recommendations. His ground-level perspective and detailed observations were valuable in understanding how the existing protection protocols had both succeeded and failed. His quick identification of the threat had prevented a serious breach, but the fact that Crane had conducted surveillance for weeks without being detected highlighted areas for improvement. One of the most significant outcomes of the incident was a comprehensive review of how the palace managed service personnel, visitors, and media access. Crane had exploited several small vulnerabilities in the system, none of which were serious individually, but which collectively had allowed him to gather dangerous amounts of information. The review also examined how protection officers communicated with each other and with the royal family members they protected. Marcus's ability to recognize the threat and respond decisively had been crucial, but investigators wanted to understand whether other officers might have spotted warning signs earlier, if communication protocols had been different. Prince George, meanwhile, seemed to adapt to the incident with the resilience of childhood. He asked his father several questions about what had happened and why Marcus had needed to stop the man with the camera. Prince William answered honestly but age-appropriately, explaining that sometimes people tried to take pictures without permission and that Marcus's job was to make sure that didn't happen. The young prince's reaction to Marcus after the incident was particularly touching. Rather than being frightened or distant, George seemed to have developed an even stronger trust in his protection officer. He began asking Marcus more questions about his work and his family, showing the natural curiosity of an 8-year-old who had witnessed something dramatic but didn't fully understand its implications. This developing relationship between Prince George and Marcus became an important factor in the ongoing security arrangements. Child psychologists advised that maintaining continuity and stability in George's protection team was crucial for his emotional well-being. The incident had shown George that his security officers weren't just background figures, but real people who cared about his safety. As the week progressed, more details emerged about the broader conspiracy that Crane had been part of. International intelligence sharing revealed that similar surveillance operations had been attempted against other royal families and high-profile political figures across Europe. The pattern suggested a coordinated effort by unknown actors to gather intelligence on protected individuals and their security arrangements. This discovery elevated Marcus's actions from a single incident to part of a much larger security victory. By stopping Crane when he did, Marcus had not only protected Prince George but had also disrupted a significant intelligence operation that could have compromised royal security across multiple countries. The recognition of this broader significance led to Marcus being commended not just by his immediate superiors, but by senior officials from multiple government departments. His quick thinking and decisive action had prevented what could have been a serious breach with international implications. However, Marcus himself remained focused on the personal, rather than the political aspects of what had happened. For him, the most important outcome was that Prince George was safe and could continue his childhood without being traumatized by the incident. Everything else, the commendations, the investigations, the policy changes, was secondary to that fundamental protective mission. 3 days after the incident, Marcus received an unexpected phone call from Prince William's private secretary. The prince wanted to meet with him privately, outside the formal debriefing and investigation processes. Such personal meetings between royal family members and protection officers were unusual but not unprecedented, especially after significant security events. The meeting was arranged for the following morning in Prince William's private study, a comfortable room filled with family photographs, books, and personal mementos. Unlike the formal spaces of the palace, this room reflected William's personality and interests, pictures of his children, his wife, and his late mother, along with books about conservation, military history, and aviation. When Marcus arrived, Prince William was already waiting, dressed casually in jeans and a polo shirt rather than his usual formal attire. This immediately set a more relaxed tone for their conversation. "Please sit down," William said, gesturing to a comfortable armchair. "I wanted to speak with you personally, away from all the official procedures and investigations." Marcus took the offered seat, still maintaining the respectful formality that came naturally after years of royal protection work. "Of course, sir. How can I help?" William leaned forward, his expression serious but warm. "Marcus, what you did the other day, stepping directly into harm's way to protect George, that wasn't just professional duty. That was personal courage. And Catherine and I want you to know how deeply grateful we are." Marcus felt uncomfortable with the praise, as he always did when people made his actions seem more heroic than they felt to him. "Sir, any officer in my position would have done the same thing." "No," William replied firmly. "They wouldn't have. I've been around protection officers my entire life, and what you did required split-second judgment, physical courage, and a willingness to put someone else's safety before your own. Those aren't qualities you can teach in training courses." The prince paused, looking at one of the photographs on his desk, a picture of Prince George laughing while building a sandcastle during a family holiday. "George is more than just a future king to us. He's our little boy who loves dragons and football and asking endless questions about how things work. When someone threatens him, they're not threatening the institution or the crown. They're threatening my child." Marcus nodded, understanding completely. This was exactly why he had acted so decisively. In that moment in the garden, Prince George hadn't been a royal assignment. He had been a vulnerable child who needed protection. "I wanted to ask you about something," William continued. "The investigators have told me that this Crane fellow had been watching George for weeks, gathering detailed information about his routines and activities. How did he manage to do that without being detected?" This was a question Marcus had been grappling with since the incident. "Sir, the truth is that our security system is designed to protect against direct threats, people trying to get close enough to cause immediate harm. It's much harder to detect someone who's patient and methodical, especially if they're using sophisticated surveillance techniques from a distance. But you spotted him immediately when he got close." Marcus thought about this carefully. "It was a combination of factors, sir. His movement pattern was wrong for the environment. He was too focused, too purposeful. Most people in the gardens move casually. They stop to look at flowers, they change direction randomly, they get distracted by interesting things. This man was moving like someone with a specific objective." William absorbed this information thoughtfully. As someone who had lived his entire life under protection, he understood security procedures better than most people realized. "What changes do you think we need to make to prevent something like this from happening again?" "Honestly, sir, I think the most important thing is maintaining human judgment alongside all the technical systems. Cameras and sensors can detect obvious threats, but they can't read body language or notice when someone's behavior doesn't fit the environment. That requires experienced officers who know what normal looks like. And how do we make sure we have officers with that kind of experience and judgment?" Marcus considered this question carefully. He knew that Prince William was genuinely interested in improving security, not just for his own family, but for all the people who depended on royal protection services. Training helps, but experience is really what matters. The more time an officer spends in different environments, the better they become at spotting things that don't belong. Also, officers need to feel supported when they make judgment calls, even if those calls turn out to be wrong sometimes. William nodded approvingly. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. The investigators have been focused on procedures and protocols, but I needed to hear from someone who was actually there, making decisions in real time. The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, with William asking detailed questions about Marcus's background, his family, and his perspectives on royal protection work. It became clear that this wasn't just about the recent incident. William was trying to understand the people who dedicated their lives to protecting his family. Marcus, I want you to know that what you did has changed how Catherine and I think about security, William said as their meeting drew to a close. We've always appreciated our protection officers, but seeing someone actually put their life on the line for our son, that's something we'll never forget. As Marcus prepared to leave, William stood up and extended his hand. I also want you to know that you have our complete trust and support. If you ever need anything at all, for yourself or your family, please don't hesitate to ask. This offer of support would prove to be more significant than Marcus realized at the time. Over the following weeks, as the investigation into the surveillance operation continued, it became clear that the incident had attracted considerable media attention. While the specific details remained classified, enough information had leaked to make Marcus's name known to journalists and royal watchers. The attention was unwelcome and potentially dangerous. Protection officers were supposed to remain anonymous, invisible guardians who could blend into any environment. Having his identity known compromised Marcus's effectiveness and potentially put his own family at risk. When the media pressure became too intense, Marcus remembered Prince William's offer of support and reached out to the prince's private secretary. The response was immediate and comprehensive. Legal advisors helped Marcus understand his rights regarding privacy and media harassment. Security consultants provided advice on protecting his family's safety. Most importantly, Palace communications staff worked to minimize media speculation and redirect attention away from Marcus personally. This support extended beyond just practical help. Prince William made sure that Marcus's superiors understood the royal family's appreciation for his actions and their desire to see him protected from any negative consequences. This backing was crucial in ensuring that Marcus could continue his career without being constantly defined by one incident, no matter how significant. The investigation into David Crane and his associates continued to reveal the sophisticated nature of the surveillance operation. Forensic analysis of his equipment showed that he had been using military-grade listening devices, capable of picking up conversations from hundreds of yards away. The recordings he had made included not just Prince George's activities, but also detailed discussions about security procedures, daily schedules, and family routines. Even more disturbing was the discovery that Crane had been building detailed psychological profiles of his targets. His notes included observations about Prince George's personality, his fears, his interests, and his relationships with family members and staff. This level of analysis suggested that the surveillance was intended for more than just media exploitation. It was the kind of intelligence gathering that could be used to plan kidnapping attempts or other serious crimes. The international investigation revealed connections between Crane's operation and similar surveillance activities in other countries. Intelligence services identified a network of individuals who specialized in gathering detailed information about high-profile protected individuals and their families. The network appeared to be commercial rather than state-sponsored, selling information to the highest bidder regardless of their intentions. This discovery led to a coordinated international law enforcement operation targeting the entire network. Marcus's quick action in stopping Crane had not only protected Prince George, but had also provided the breakthrough needed to identify and disrupt a major criminal organization. As these broader implications became clear, Marcus found himself consulted by security experts from around the world. His experience had provided valuable insights into how sophisticated surveillance operations worked and how they could be detected and prevented. His perspective as the officer who had actually confronted the threat was considered invaluable by security professionals. However, Marcus remained most concerned about the immediate impact on Prince George and his family. The young prince had handled the incident well, but the knowledge that someone had been watching him for weeks was unsettling. Child psychologists worked with the royal family to help George understand what had happened without causing unnecessary fear or anxiety. Prince George's resilience was remarkable. Rather than becoming fearful or withdrawn, he seemed to view the incident as confirmation that his protection officers were genuinely looking out for him. His relationship with Marcus grew stronger, built on the foundation of trust that had been established during the crisis. This developing bond between the prince and his protector became an important element in George's ongoing security arrangements. The child psychologists advised that maintaining this relationship would help George feel secure and confident as he continued to grow up in the unique environment of royal life. Marcus began to understand that his role involved much more than just physical protection. He was helping to shape how Prince George viewed security, how the young prince related to the people around him, and how he understood his own place in the world. This was a responsibility that went far beyond anything covered in training manuals. The incident also had significant impacts on how the palace managed security for all the royal children. New protocols were developed for detecting long-term surveillance. Additional training was provided to all protection officers, and communication systems were upgraded to ensure that suspicious activities could be reported and investigated more quickly. Marcus was heavily involved in developing these new procedures, drawing on his experience to help identify potential vulnerabilities and improve response protocols. His insights were particularly valuable because he understood both the theoretical security principles and the practical realities of making split-second decisions under pressure. One of the most important changes was the implementation of regular security briefings that included detailed psychological profiles of potential threats. Officers were trained not just to identify immediate dangers, but to recognize the signs of long-term surveillance and intelligence-gathering operations. These changes reflected a broader evolution in royal protection, moving from a focus purely on preventing direct attacks to a more comprehensive approach that included protecting privacy, preventing intelligence gathering, and maintaining the psychological well-being of the protected individuals. As the months passed, Marcus's actions on that September afternoon continued to resonate through multiple levels of the security establishment. His decisive intervention had prevented what could have been a catastrophic breach of royal security, but it had also demonstrated the importance of human judgment and courage in an increasingly technological world. The incident became a case study used in training programs for protection officers around the world. Marcus's decision-making process, his risk assessment, and his willingness to act decisively under uncertainty were analyzed and taught as examples of best practice in close protection work. However, for Marcus himself, the most meaningful outcome remained the simple fact that Prince George was safe and could continue his childhood without being defined by this threat. Everything else, the recognition, the policy changes, the international implications, was secondary to that fundamental protective mission that had motivated him to act in the first place. 6 months after the incident, Marcus was called to an unexpected meeting with the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police and senior officials from the Cabinet Office. The meeting was held at New Scotland Yard rather than the palace, suggesting that this was about more than just routine royal protection matters. Commissioner Sarah Mitchell was known throughout the police service for her direct approach and her focus on operational excellence. She had personally reviewed the investigation into David Crane and the broader surveillance network, and she wanted to discuss the implications with Marcus face-to-face. "Detective Sergeant Thompson," she began formally, "your actions on September 15th prevented what our intelligence services now believe could have been the most serious breach of royal security in decades. The information that Crane and his associates were gathering was being compiled into what can only be described as an operational handbook for targeting Prince George." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Even 6 months later, new details about the conspiracy continued to emerge, each revelation more disturbing than the last. The international investigation has identified at least 12 individuals across 6 countries who were involved in gathering intelligence on various royal children, the commissioner continued. The network was sophisticated, well-funded, and had been operating for over 3 years before we disrupted it. Assistant Commissioner James Crawford, who oversaw Royal Protection Services, added his perspective. "Marcus, What makes your intervention particularly significant is that you acted on instinct and training when the situation was still developing. By the time we had confirmation that this was a serious threat, it would have been too late to prevent Crane from completing his mission. The officials went on to explain that the recovered intelligence materials had revealed plans that went far beyond simple surveillance. The criminal network had been developing detailed operational plans for potential kidnapping attempts, using the psychological profiles and routine information they had gathered to identify vulnerabilities and opportunities. The level of planning was extraordinary, Commissioner Mitchell explained. They knew Prince George's favorite places in the palace gardens, his daily routines, his relationship with different staff members, even his typical responses to various situations. This wasn't random criminal activity. This was professional intelligence gathering at the highest level. Marcus absorbed this information with a growing sense of the magnitude of what had been prevented. "Ma'am, do we know who was funding this operation? Who was the ultimate target?" "That's where the investigation becomes even more concerning," Crawford replied. "The evidence suggests that the intelligence was being prepared for sale to multiple buyers. Some appeared to be criminal organizations interested in kidnapping for ransom. Others had profiles that suggested possible terrorist connections. Still others seemed to be foreign intelligence services interested in compromising British security." The meeting continued for over 2 hours, with officials briefing Marcus on various aspects of the ongoing investigation. The scope was staggering. What had started as one man with a camera in the palace gardens had revealed a complex international network with connections to organized crime, terrorism, and state-sponsored espionage. "The reason we're briefing you on all of this," Commissioner Mitchell said as the meeting concluded, "is that you've become a central figure in a case that has implications far beyond royal protection. Your testimony may be needed in international courts, and your expertise is being sought by security services in allied countries." This revelation worried Marcus more than he let on. He had joined the police service to protect people, not to become a public figure in international security cases. His effectiveness as a protection officer depended on his ability to remain anonymous and blend into different environments. As if reading his thoughts, Crawford addressed his concerns directly. "We understand that this level of attention isn't what you signed up for, Marcus. We're working to minimize your public profile while still allowing the investigation to proceed. Prince William has personally requested that your privacy and your family's safety be given the highest priority." The mention of Prince William's involvement reminded Marcus of how supportive the royal family had been throughout the entire ordeal. Not only had they protected him from media attention, but they had also ensured that his career continued to advance despite the disruption caused by the investigation. Over the following weeks, Marcus found himself consulting on security arrangements for other high-profile individuals and their families. His experience with detecting and confronting surveillance operations made him valuable to protection services, beyond just the royal context. He worked with diplomatic security teams, corporate protection specialists, and international law enforcement agencies. This expanded role was both professionally rewarding and personally challenging. Marcus enjoyed the opportunity to use his experience to help protect other vulnerable individuals, but he missed the day-to-day relationship he had built with Prince George and the Cambridge family. The relationship between Marcus and Prince George had continued to develop over the months since the incident. The young prince had grown more curious about Marcus's work and had begun asking sophisticated questions about security and protection. These conversations revealed George's growing awareness of his unique position in the world and his need to understand the people dedicated to keeping him safe. Prince William and Princess Catherine had encouraged this relationship, understanding that George's comfort with his protection officers was crucial for his psychological well-being as he grew up. They wanted their children to see their security detail not as intimidating barriers between them and the world, but as trusted guardians who genuinely cared about their welfare. During one memorable conversation, Prince George had asked Marcus why he had decided to become a protection officer. Marcus had explained that he wanted to help keep important people safe, just like knights in the stories George loved to read. "But knights fight dragons," George had pointed out with 8-year-old logic. "What do you fight?" Marcus had thought carefully about his answer. "I fight the things that might hurt people you care about, even if those things aren't dragons. Sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones you can't see." This explanation had seemed to satisfy George's curiosity, while also helping him understand that security threats could take many different forms. It was exactly the kind of age-appropriate education that the royal family wanted their children to receive about the realities of their protected lives. As the first anniversary of the incident approached, Marcus received another unexpected invitation. This time, it was from Princess Catherine, who wanted to thank him personally for his role in protecting her son. The meeting was arranged as a private tea in her personal sitting room, away from the formal protocols of official palace business. Princess Catherine was known for her warmth and genuine interest in the people who worked to support her family. She had made a point of getting to know all of Prince George's regular protection officers, understanding that these relationships were important for her son's emotional development. "Marcus," she began, pouring tea from a delicate china service, "I wanted to speak with you personally about what happened last year. As George's mother, I can never adequately express how grateful I am for what you did." Marcus felt the familiar discomfort that came with being thanked for doing what he considered his job. "Your Royal Highness, I was just doing what any officer would do in that situation." Catherine smiled gently. "No, Marcus, that's not true. What you did required extraordinary courage and judgment. You made a split-second decision that quite literally saved my son from unimaginable danger." She paused, looking at a photograph of Prince George on her desk, a picture of him playing football in the palace gardens, laughing with pure childhood joy. "The investigators have told us what that man and his associates were planning. The thought of what could have happened if you hadn't been there, if you hadn't acted so quickly, it's something that William and I try not to think about." The conversation turned to more general topics: Marcus's family, his career goals, and his perspectives on royal protection work. Princess Catherine asked thoughtful questions about the challenges facing protection officers and their families, showing genuine interest in understanding their experiences and concerns. "Marcus, I want you to know that you've changed how George thinks about his security," Catherine said near the end of their conversation. "He used to see his protection officers as part of the background of his life. Now he understands that they're real people who care about him personally. That's a valuable lesson for a future king to learn." This observation touched on something Marcus had been thinking about for months. His relationship with Prince George was helping to shape how the young prince understood leadership, service, and the responsibility that came with his position. These weren't lessons that could be taught in formal education. They had to be learned through real relationships with people who demonstrated these values through their actions. As Marcus left his meeting with Princess Catherine, he reflected on how much his life had changed since that September afternoon in the palace gardens. What had started as a routine protection assignment had evolved into something much more significant, a relationship that was helping to shape the character and worldview of a future king. The investigation into the surveillance network continued to yield results. Additional arrests were made across multiple countries, and several planned operations against other high-profile targets were disrupted. Marcus's quick action had not only protected Prince George, but had also prevented numerous other potential crimes. The international law enforcement cooperation sparked by the case led to improved intelligence sharing and coordination between different countries' protection services. Marcus found himself invited to conferences and training programs where he shared his experience with officers from around the world. These speaking engagements were professionally rewarding but personally draining. Marcus was naturally modest and preferred to work behind the scenes rather than being the center of attention. However, he understood that sharing his experience could help other officers recognize and respond to similar threats. One of the most significant outcomes of the case was the development of new training protocols for protection officers worldwide. Marcus's decision-making process during the crisis was analyzed and incorporated into curricula that taught officers how to make rapid threat assessments under pressure. The psychological aspects of his actions were particularly studied. Experts wanted to understand what enabled one officer to act decisively while others might have hesitated or waited for backup. The research revealed that Marcus's success came from a combination of technical training, practical experience, and personal conviction about his protective mission. However, the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. On the first anniversary of the incident, Prince George himself asked if he could give Marcus a thank you card he had made. The card, decorated with drawings of knights and dragons, simply said, "Thank you for keeping me safe. You are like a knight in real life." For Marcus, this simple gesture from an 8-year-old boy was more significant than all the official commendations and professional recognition combined. It reminded him why he had chosen this career and why the risks and sacrifices were worthwhile. As he looked back on the events of the past year, Marcus understood that his moment of decision in the palace gardens had changed not only his own life, but also the lives of Prince George, the royal family, and protection officers around the world. His choice to put duty over personal safety had prevented a tragedy and revealed a threat that extended far beyond what anyone had initially imagined. The case continued to have ripple effects throughout the international security community. But for Marcus, the most important outcome remained the simplest. Prince George was safe and could continue growing up with the security and confidence that every child deserved. 2 years after the incident that changed everything, Marcus stood in the same palace garden where he had confronted David Crane. The oak tree where Prince George loved to climb was now fuller, its branches reaching higher toward the sky. Prince George, now 10 years old, was once again playing beneath its canopy, but he was no longer the same carefree 8-year-old Marcus had protected that day. The boy had grown taller, his face more mature, and his questions more thoughtful. He had learned about the broader implications of what Marcus had prevented, understanding in age-appropriate terms that the threat had been more serious than anyone had initially realized. This knowledge had made him more appreciative of his protection officers and more aware of his unique position in the world. Marcus watched as Prince George practiced football skills with his younger sister, Princess Charlotte, and their little brother, Prince Louis. The family dynamic was joyful and natural, a testament to Prince William and Princess Catherine's efforts to maintain normalcy despite the extraordinary security requirements of royal life. Prince William approached, walking across the garden with the relaxed confidence that had developed over his years as a senior royal. His relationship with Marcus had evolved significantly since that critical day, built on mutual respect and the shared experience of having navigated a genuine crisis together. "Marcus," William said, joining him in observing the children's play. "Hard to believe it's been 2 years, isn't it?" "Yes, sir. Prince George has grown considerably." William smiled, watching his eldest son attempt an ambitious football trick that ended with him tumbling onto the grass, laughing. "He has indeed. In more ways than just physically. The experience taught him something important about the people who protect our family." The conversation was interrupted by Prince George running over to them, slightly out of breath from his football practice. "Papa, can Marcus teach me some of those detective skills he knows?" This had become a running request from George, who had developed a keen interest in Marcus's work. The young prince was fascinated by the idea of noticing things that others missed and understanding how to keep people safe. "What kind of detective skills are you thinking about, George?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious about what had captured the boy's imagination. "You know, like how you knew that man was dangerous before anyone else did? How do you notice things like that?" Marcus knelt down to George's level, considering how to explain complex security concepts to a 10-year-old. "Well, it's mostly about paying attention to things that seem different or out of place. Like if someone is walking in a way that doesn't match the place they're in, or if they're too focused on one particular thing." George nodded seriously, absorbing this information. "So if I see someone acting strange around our family, I should tell you?" "Absolutely," Marcus replied. "But remember, most strange behavior is perfectly harmless. People act differently for all sorts of innocent reasons. The important thing is to notice and report, but not to worry unnecessarily." Prince William listened to this exchange with satisfaction. This was exactly the kind of security education he wanted his children to receive: practical awareness without paranoia, understanding without fear. After George returned to his games, William and Marcus continued their conversation. "Marcus, I wanted to update you on the latest developments in the investigation. The Crown Prosecution Service has informed us that the main trial will begin next month. The legal proceedings had been complex and drawn out, involving multiple jurisdictions and international cooperation. David Crane had eventually pleaded guilty to various charges related to stalking, surveillance, and conspiracy, but his associates in other countries were still fighting extradition and prosecution." "Will you be required to testify, sir?" Marcus asked. "Yes, but the prosecution team believes your testimony will be the most crucial. You were the only witness to the actual confrontation, and your professional assessment of the threat level will be key to establishing the seriousness of the conspiracy." Marcus had been preparing for this testimony for months, working with legal advisors to ensure that his account would be clear and compelling while protecting sensitive information about royal security procedures. It was a delicate balance between providing enough detail to support the prosecution and maintaining the confidentiality that effective protection required. The trial would mark the culmination of 2 years of investigation and legal preparation. Intelligence services had dismantled the entire surveillance network, arresting operatives in 6 different countries and seizing equipment worth millions of pounds. The scope of the conspiracy had amazed even experienced investigators. The prosecutors believe this case will set important precedents for how surveillance crimes against protected individuals are prosecuted. William continued, "Your actions that day didn't just protect George. They've helped strengthen legal protections for vulnerable people everywhere." This broader impact had been one of the unexpected consequences of the incident. Legal experts had used the case to push for stronger laws against sophisticated surveillance operations, particularly those targeting children and other vulnerable individuals. Several countries had updated their legislation as a direct result of what the investigation had revealed. As they talked, Princess Catherine appeared from the palace, walking toward them with the graceful bearing that had made her one of the most admired members of the royal family. Her relationship with the protection officers had always been warm and genuine, but her gratitude toward Marcus remained particularly evident. "Marcus," she said, greeting him with a smile, "I'm so glad you're here today. I wanted to ask if you and Sarah might join us for a private dinner next week. Nothing formal, just our family and yours." This invitation represented something unprecedented in royal protection work. While senior officers occasionally attended formal functions, private family dinners between royals and their protection officers were virtually unknown. It demonstrated the unique relationship that had developed between the Cambridge family and Marcus. "That's very kind of you, Your Royal Highness. I'll need to check with Sarah about our schedule, but I'm sure she'd be delighted." Catherine's expression grew more serious. "Marcus, I also wanted to tell you about something George said to me last week. He asked if all children have someone like you looking out for them. When I explained that not everyone has personal protection officers, he was quite concerned." She paused, watching her eldest son continue his football practice. "He said he thought everyone should have someone who cared enough to keep them safe the way you keep him safe. For a 10-year-old, that shows remarkable empathy and understanding." This anecdote reflected something that had become increasingly clear over the past 2 years. Prince George's experience with Marcus had shaped his understanding of service, duty, and care for others. These weren't abstract concepts to him. They were embodied in the person of a protection officer who had risked his own safety to keep George secure. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Chief Inspector Williams, who had requested a meeting to discuss upcoming changes to the protection arrangements. As Prince George continued to grow and take on more public responsibilities, his security needs would evolve accordingly. "Marcus," Williams said after greeting the royal family members, "I wanted to discuss your next assignment with you. We're planning some significant changes to how we handle protection for the Cambridge children, and your experience and relationship with the family make you central to those plans." The proposed changes reflected lessons learned from the surveillance incident and the ongoing evolution of threats facing the royal family. Traditional close protection was being supplemented with more sophisticated intelligence gathering and threat assessment capabilities. "We're developing a new role that combines traditional protection work with threat analysis and investigation," Williams explained. "The officer in this position would work more closely with intelligence services and would have broader responsibilities for identifying and preventing sophisticated threats like the one you disrupted." Marcus was intrigued by the proposal, but also concerned about how it might affect his relationship with Prince George and the family. "Sir, would this role still involve day-to-day protection duties?" "Yes, but it would also include coordination with other agencies, training responsibilities, and casework on threats against the broader royal family. You'd essentially become our specialist in complex surveillance and intelligence threats." Prince William had been listening to this conversation with interest. "Marcus, from our perspective, this role would allow you to use your experience to protect not just George, but all of our children and other royal family members. It seems like a natural evolution of the work you're already doing." The offer represented a significant career advancement and an opportunity to have broader impact on royal protection services. However, Marcus was reluctant to accept anything that might distance him from Prince George, with whom he had built such an important relationship. "Sir, I'm honored by the confidence you're showing in me. Could I have some time to consider the proposal and discuss it with my family?" "Of course," Williams replied. "Take all the time you need." This isn't just about your career, it's about ensuring that the lessons learned from your experience are applied more broadly to protect other vulnerable individuals. As the meeting concluded and the various officials departed, Marcus found himself alone in the garden with Prince George, who had finished his football practice and was sitting beneath the oak tree, reading one of his favorite books about medieval knights. "Marcus?" George said, looking up from his book. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, Your Royal Highness." "Do you ever wish that day in the garden had never happened? It must have been scary." Marcus considered the question carefully. It was the first time George had asked directly about the emotional impact of the incident. "You know, George, it was scary for a moment, but I'm glad it happened the way it did, because it meant you were safe." George nodded thoughtfully. "Papa told me that you might have a new job that helps protect other children too. I think that's a good idea. Everyone should have someone looking out for them." The wisdom in this simple statement struck Marcus profoundly. Here was a 10-year-old boy who understood that security and protection weren't privileges to be hoarded but responsibilities to be shared. Prince George's experience with Marcus had taught him that caring for others' safety was not just a professional duty, but a moral obligation. As the afternoon sun began to set over the palace gardens, Marcus made his decision about the new role. He would accept the position, but with the understanding that his relationship with Prince George would remain a priority. The boy had taught him as much as he had protected him, and that relationship had become one of the most meaningful aspects of his career. The trial of David Crane and his associates would begin in 3 weeks. Marcus would testify about those crucial moments in the garden when he had chosen to step between a potential threat and a vulnerable child. But the real story wasn't about those few minutes of confrontation. It was about the 2 years of growth, learning, and relationship building that had followed. Prince George had learned about courage, service, and the importance of people who dedicate their lives to protecting others. Marcus had learned about the profound responsibility of not just keeping someone safe, but helping to shape their character and worldview through daily example. Prince William and Princess Catherine had seen their eldest son develop a mature understanding of security and an appreciation for the people who serve their family. They had also witnessed the extraordinary dedication of an officer who had risked everything to protect their child and had continued to serve with distinction in the years that followed. As Marcus prepared to leave the palace that evening, he reflected on how much had changed since that critical day in September. The incident had lasted only minutes, but its impact would influence the rest of Prince George's life, Marcus's career, and royal protection services around the world. The oak tree in the garden would continue to grow, its branches reaching higher each year. Prince George would continue to climb it, play beneath it, and perhaps someday tell his own children about the day when someone chose duty over fear to keep him safe. And Marcus would continue to serve, carrying with him the knowledge that sometimes a single moment of courage could protect not just one person, but generations of a family and the institution they represented. The story of that September day had become more than just a security incident. It had become a testament to the power of individual dedication, the importance of human relationships and professional service, and the way that ordinary people could rise to extraordinary challenges when protecting something precious. As Prince George waved goodbye from his bedroom window, Marcus knew that their story was far from over. It would continue to unfold through years of shared experiences, mutual respect, and the ongoing mission of keeping a future king safe, while helping him grow into a leader worthy of the crown he would one day wear.